Travis Suit did the impossible. He swam from Bimini to South Florida. He crossed a blue desert to raise money for his daughter. As he says, with tears lovingly filling his eyes, "I can't help but see how beautiful adversity can be for transforming the perception of life into just a moment-by-moment miracle. I never knew the greatest gift in my life was going to be my daughter and this disease." His daughter's name is Piper. Her disease is cystic fibrosis, which has transformed her life and his. Travis started a nonprofit called Piper's Angels Foundation that is helping Piper and the thousands of other people like her fight this disease, which, as Travis says, leaves those who suffer with it fighting to simply breathe. How does he view this adversity that walked unwanted into his family's life? Travis says, "Adversity is the starting line for courage. Courage becomes the fuel for inspiration in our life. And from there, inspiration can really open the door to devotion. Devotion to Piper, the reason he swam across the blue desert." Hello, and welcome to At the Podium with me, Patrick Huey. At the Podium is a multimedia platform that brings together people from a diverse background of lives, careers, and experiences who all share one thing in common. They have stepped fully into the transformative power of finding and raising their voices to make an impact on the world we live in today. At the Podium holds a space for everyone to share their stories, to be heard, and to bring us inspiration. Today, I'm thrilled to share the podium with Travis Suit. Travis Suit is a social entrepreneur, business and leadership coach, motivational speaker, and producer of multimedia content and events. Travis is a graduate of the University of Central Florida with a focus in business management and entrepreneurship. Travis has founded multiple companies and lifestyle brands and has developed a variety of highly successful multimedia and event management projects by extending these brands through the creation of large-scale public events, entertainment, music, and merchandise. As a proud father of a beautiful daughter named Piper with cystic fibrosis, Travis turned his focus toward becoming an advocate for the CF community and founded the Piper's Angels Foundation. Travis created the Crossing for Cystic Fibrosis, an 80-mile endurance paddle challenge to raise money and awareness to support the CF community. Travis was recently named Nonprofit Executive of the Year. Travis, welcome to At the Podium.
Thank you so much, Patrick. It's an honor to be here with you.
I'm so happy that we were able to make this happen today. I was thinking, what would be a really good Valentine's Day episode? And I thought, your story, this incredible love that you have for your daughter and the entire CF community would be a perfect Valentine's Day love letter to the world. So thank you for making time for me today.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you. That's beautiful. I love that. I appreciate that. And I'll definitely share that with my daughter.
Oh, awesome. So I was doing a little research and I found this beautiful quote from you about Piper. And you wrote, "When my daughter Piper was diagnosed with CF at the age of 4, I experienced a seismic shift in consciousness that began with a dark night of the soul, launched me into a journey across an ocean, and birthed me into a community of individuals whose light, courage, and love have inspired me to advocate with a passion as eternal as my love for Piper. I consider it an honor to bear witness to the lives and legacies of every CF warrior. They have been my greatest teachers." So your daughter Piper was 4 years old when she was diagnosed with cystic fibrosis. What is CF, and how did the doctors discover that she had this disease that is viewed as a terminal illness?
Cystic fibrosis is a progressive genetic disease. So it takes two parents who are both carriers of the gene. And when they conceive a child, then the child would have a 25% chance of having cystic fibrosis and a 50% chance of carrying the CF gene. On a biological level, cystic fibrosis is a defective protein inside the cells that is really instrumental in controlling the inflow and outflow of sodium chloride. It basically salt water in the body. And because of that malfunction, because of that defect, the body can't control its ability to produce mucus. And so in the digestive system and the open airway of the lungs, where mucus is really a lubricant for the body, there's this overabundance of mucus. And that can cause a host of complications and issues. And ultimately, in the digestive system, you see a lot of compaction issues. You see a lot of pancreatic issues related to malabsorption of nutrients. And then in the lungs, basically, if you think about like a petri dish in science class, right? It's like, a warm, wet, moist, spongy, sticky environment that's open to any viruses, bacterias, funguses. When you breathe that stuff in, your lungs can really harbor and grow a lot of that stuff if you have a lot of sticky mucus buildup. And that can cause a lot of inflammation, lung tissue damage, and recurring lung infections over and over and over, which is ultimately why people with CF lose their ability to breathe over their lifetime and experience decreased lung function. So somebody with CF is constantly battling to fight for their lung function percentages, over time. And sometimes their lung function can go up and down drastically based on how sick or healthy they are.
So how did you explain that to a 4-year-old, that that's what was happening to her body?
Well, that's a great question. And that was a tough thing to learn about and explore, because when I found out about her diagnosis, there was like an implosion of heartbreak and emotion and kind of a shattering of reality. It took me 5 years to really cope with that and accept it on the deepest level. So, initially I was really blinded by the emotion of it all. So I don't think I really had the capability to communicate with her effectively in the beginning. As I understood the disease and I began to become more educated about it, like simple things like, if you leave a hose on in the grass, the water floods the yard. Or if you put too much oil in a car, the car needs a certain amount of oil, just like the body needs a certain amount of mucus. If you put too much oil, it really can flood the system, and that can create a lot of complications, right? So trying to find simple ways to explain it. But really for her, I think at that age, she just knew she was sick.
Mm-hmm.
And that she had to go to the doctors. And I don't think until she was a little bit older, maybe around 8 years old, it really set in that this is something that could lead to, an earlier expiration date in life.
You use the language terminal illness. And is it viewed as a terminal illness, or is it viewed as something that can be managed throughout a person's life?
The answer to that question has changed a lot in the last 10, 15 years. And the reason is because in the 1970s, kids were dying at infancy before the age of 5 years old, almost all of them from basically failure to thrive. There were no medications, there was no treatment available, there is no cure. But I mean, that was the life expectancy. In the 80s, that life expectancy started to grow because they were developing therapies to help with the respiratory therapies. In the late 80s, they discovered the actual gene, which led to a lot of pharmaceutical investment to develop drug therapies to help. So we've seen this miraculous life expectancy expand. So at one time, it was absolutely a terminal illness, because if you were diagnosed, you were going to die at a very young age. Now, It's still considered a terminal disease because there's no cure, but I hear more people saying, a life-limiting disease. That seems to be more definitive of kind of the journey now, because people with CF are living into their 30s and 40s and 50s and beyond, depending on the genetic variation. And there's over 2,000 genetic variations of CF. So you have a spectrum of very light symptoms to moderate to severe.
You described the moment when you found out about this diagnosis as a dark night of the soul that went on for about 5 years until you were able to sort of wrap your own mind around it, what this meant for her life and for your life. When you found out, what type of emotional, medical, and financial support was there for you through this process?
Yeah, emotionally, I'm so grateful that I had family and friends and a circle of support that really were cheerleaders in my corner. It makes me emotional to think about it now, just how many people really showed up for me in my life at that time. You know, financially, we didn't really know what we were in for and what the costs of this disease could mean to the family. And really, we're very fortunate to live in a country where kids with rare diseases and terminal diseases are often taken care of by different government programs. So a lot of the in the hospital treatment, a lot of the medications and equipment that she needs are covered, but it was more balancing the doctor's appointments, taking time off work, traveling to and from the hospital, because their hospital is a couple hours away, because she can't just go to a normal hospital. She goes to a very specific care clinic for cystic fibrosis. So balancing that with her mom at the time, and that can place some level of financial burden on the family, but it was a roller coaster for sure.
How did you manage it? How did you find your way through?
Well, it was like a Swiss Army knife. I tried everything, and I'm really open and honest about that, because the path to healing can look like so many things for so many different people. And healing that type of heartbreak was really tough. It was really hard. And I relied on trusting people around me and listening, to people who knew more than me. I think one of the biggest things that really created a lot of empowerment was realizing there was a community of people that had been going through this and talking to other CF parents and seeing what they've been through, right? And that gave me hope for Piper's future. Discovering this amazing connection to the ocean and saltwater therapy for Piper put us in this positive environment and gave us an outlet, gave us some level of control to help with her illness. I tried a lot of alternative things too to really try to cope with the grief and, meditation. I even tried some psychedelic therapy to really break free of the grip I was experiencing. I really tried everything, and I just feel very blessed and fortunate that I have a faith that was challenged, right, at that time.
Yeah, of course.
But over time, that healing has become, in that journey has taught me so much and has created a depth of faith that is really unshakable at this point. And I'm so grateful for that in my life, to having gone through that, and Piper's soul journey teaching me that. Like I said, it took me 5 years to go from seeing this as something really tragic to a gift, to seeing how much adversity can bring so much good into your life.
Mm. How did this diagnosis impact your relationship with her mother?
Well, she is a great mom. And I had an older friend, a woman, tell me when this happened that these types of diagnoses can either tear a family apart or bring them together. And luckily in our case, just looking at this little girl and seeing what she was going through and seeing her sick, seeing her physically having coughing fits and staying up at night and watching her do these treatments every single day, it keeps your perspective pretty grounded because it's in your face every day, right? It's like morning, you're doing treatments, she's taking pills, middle of the day, evening, like going to her doctor's appointments and, really it's a lot of information. It can be overwhelming, but we found a way to tag team it. And when I meet CF moms who are kind of single moms, right? Or parents, or that are in really challenging situations. Sometimes parents have more than one child with CF. You just realize, wow, some people, their situation, their circumstances can be really difficult. And I feel very grateful that, Piper's mom and I have that strength together to support her.
You describe the diagnosis and people living with CF as buying more time. Can you go deeper into that?
Well, people with CF are living longer, and there's a cost to buying more time, is what I was referring to, which is that, when you look at somebody's life and you look at quality of life, it's a really tough situation to look at. But let's say in the 1970s, right, you have a child with cystic fibrosis. You're going through the grief, the turmoil, and the pain and the reality that this child's going to die. And they die at 5 years old. Well, that emotional burden may carry on for the rest of your life. But the financial burden, the burden of like managing the disease, managing a child's life with a disease like that is gone. That aspect is over. So when people with CF started living longer, you can imagine, well, now that same child's going to live to be 20 years old. Now that's adding 15 more years of treatments and therapies and hospital visits, 15 more years of that financial burden on the family, 15 more years of time, which is a blessing with that person. But at the same time, it's like 15 more years of heartbreak in your face. You're seeing this process slowly happening in front of you. And then you expand that to the current time, right? Now somebody with CF is going to live to be 50, but now they're taking more antibiotics and steroids their whole life. They're going to need a lung transplant possibly at some point to extend that life. So there's so many other factors that come into play when you expand somebody's life with a life-limiting or rare terminal disease. It's the same question you would ask for somebody who's maybe 80 years old and now gets cancer. What do they do, right? How do they look at the quality of life and what they're willing to go through to live a little bit longer, a little bit longer, a little bit longer? It's a really tough topic on some levels because, it's amazing that we have the capability and live in a day and age to help our family and to help heal people. And then we have this medical system that is so advanced that they can develop these treatments and therapies. But what's the cost of that? And what does that look like on how that person is affected? We see a lot of mental health issues. So that's a major cost, is like, well, you might live 20 years longer, but if you didn't think you were going to live that long and you didn't plan to go to college, you didn't plan that you were going to have a family because you thought you were going to be dead, and now you have 20 more years to live, your life may not look like what you would have dreamed it to be. So now you have to start to recreate from a place of like, from a whole new reality. And that we've seen it over and over and over, that for some of the young people with CF, that's a major mental health challenge.
You just said something pretty interesting about people who have CF having their life extended through the miracle of modern medicine and having to have a relook at the dreams they may have had for themselves. And I wonder, you had 4 years with Piper not knowing what was going on. How did your dreams for her and for you shift once you got that diagnosis?
Well, at that stage in my life, I was very much in a young entrepreneurial mode. And, I like to think big and I like to dream big. And so I have that same dream for my daughter, the same dream I have for myself and wanting to live life to its fullest, I have for her. So both realities changed almost overnight, right? In a sense, the one great thing about her diagnosis was the relief of knowing what was wrong. When you don't know why your child is sick, it can really keep you up at night, right? And in her case, it literally kept us up at night because she was laying in bed coughing all night long, and it was tormenting, really. And so there was some relief with the diagnosis that, okay, now we can at least move forward with how to help her. But I had some businesses that I was invested in and working on with partners and coaches that I had to really look at what was most important.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, it brought me to a crossroads that was really one of the biggest and hardest decisions of my life, which was what to do now that kind of paradigm of reality had shifted. And what do you do now with a child who may not outlive you? Like, how do you plan for their life? And what do you do to prioritize time with them? So it changes a lot. And for me, that crossroads was a really tough place because I really didn't know what to do. And I was always so confident that I had a plan and I had a dream and I had a vision. And, it was like, it's not just having the vision, but it's holding the vision, right?
Mm.
Like that's the determination to make sure you continue to work at something. So the lesson there for me was having to let go, having to surrender to life and realize, I'm going to have to trust that there's something greater that's going to come of this. And it was not easy to see in the beginning, but it's ultimately what's proven to be the case.
When Piper was 8, you say that it was one of the worst, hardest years of her life because she had been hospitalized for months. She was malnourished. There was a feeding tube in her abdomen. And I wonder how you explained what was going on to her and if that idea of surrender that you just talked about helped you move through that really difficult year of her life.
Yeah, that was definitely the most challenging year of her life. She was really sick, recurring lung infections. She had lost a lot of weight, and weight strength is strength that supports lung function. And for all humans, our lung function is the number one indicator of our lifespan. So it was really tough to watch her kind of go downhill fast. And that's what happens with CF. It's like they can be living a totally, kind of stable, healthy life. And then they get an infection and they go in the hospital. And, I've had quite a few people with CF that I've known who they went in the hospital and they never came out because they just couldn't recover. Just like a lot of people with COVID, right? A respiratory illness, they might not be 100% healthy, but, they get something and it hits them hard and sometimes the body can't recover. So it was really hard watching her go downhill. And the doctors had told us when she was 4 that she might need a feeding tube one day, because with kids with CF who have a lot of malnourishment issues with the digestive problems with CF, they often do need feeding tubes. And so when they told us that, I made it clear to Piper that was a possibility. And it was a really hard truth to share with her because she was so little. And as you try to imagine a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old, a 7-year-old understanding what a feeding tube is, right? Like, I had several people tell me, Travis, I think you don't need to be so open about that with Piper at this age because she's so young and that's hard for her to understand. But in my mind, I wanted to tell her the truth. Piper, you need to eat your breakfast because this weight is really important to you. And if you don't eat your breakfast, you don't keep your weight up, they're going to put a tube in your belly to give you the food that you need so you can be strong, you know? And after 4 years of that, when we were in the hospital and the doctors called her and her mom in and had the conversation with us, and they said, you know, she's going to need a feeding tube. This is a guaranteed thing. Like, we can't, this isn't a choice. You know, if you want to save your daughter's life, she's got to do this, right? So how do you want to tell her? And Piper's mom looked at me and said, well, you're going to tell her, you know? And it was like walking into that room, and she's laying in the bed, and sitting down on the bed next to her, it had felt to try to like wrap, you know, your head around sharing that in that moment is very, very challenging. But I had at least known and felt that I had been honest with her and I had told her the truth. And so this wasn't the first time at 8 years old she was going to hear that truth. And sometimes the truth can be really hard to share. And so when I told her, she got really upset, right? Like, she started crying, and after about 30 seconds, you know, she kind of, the crying subsided, and, you know, I coached her through taking a couple deep breaths, and she worked through it. And she went into the surgery, and she went into that experience so courageous. And you see that in the CF community. Sometimes parents aren't honest with their children because the parent's fear ends up reflecting back onto the child.
Right.
And honesty is so important when it comes to going through something hard, and really looking people in the eye, because they want to know the truth. People really ultimately want to know the truth. And they want to know that you're somebody who's going to share that with them, because it just, I mean, you really have to crack your heart open to do that.
So in the midst of all that's happening, how did you birth the idea of this foundation for her?
Well, the foundation really started because of the event, the fundraiser that I had created, which came from the inspiration of learning that the ocean had these positive healing benefits for people with cystic fibrosis. So at Piper's first clinic appointment, the respiratory therapist, we were asking questions like, well, what sports should she participate in? Should she be doing swimming, playing soccer? What's best for her? And they said, well, you know, it's really interesting. They discovered in Australia with these surfers who were reporting these amazing results to their doctor that surfing, being in the ocean, salt water, salt air, even the humidity in the air, the moisture can really help sustain better lung function. The salt literally goes into the lungs, breaks down the sticky mucus, provides better airway clearance. It's pretty miraculous in a sense, right? That like the ocean has that healing capacity for a human,
Right.
and for any human with a respiratory illness, really. So I started taking Piper out on a paddleboard because it was the easiest way. She was little. She was a little nugget, right? Like, so I'd stick her on the front of the board and we'd go
Right.
paddle together. And, you know, she'd pick up a stick along the way and help me paddle, or it would become a wand. And, you know, she would share these fairy tale stories. And we live in Florida, so we'd see manatees and stingrays and turtles. And it was really, some of those memories with her are the fondest memories I have of her as a little girl. And to know that while we were out there in the sunshine, right, and in that environment, that it was also benefiting her lungs, you know, it was so powerful. And I really fell in love with paddling, like getting out on the water. It was becoming like a hobby. And I saw a story in a magazine about these paddlers out in Hawaii doing like long distance paddles between the islands. And I went, oh, that's really interesting. And around that time, I had really been immersed in the CF community and realized, oh, I can help. There's, you know, this national CF foundation that does fundraising for research for a cure. I really want to do something. And I was trying to come up with an idea, and I was trying to think of something that would really not just fundraise, but create a lot of awareness. I've always been athletic. So I thought, well, when I saw the paddles out in Hawaii, I thought, I wonder if you could paddle from the Bahamas to Florida, because you have a natural Gulf Stream that the water's moving in the right direction, and it's like just close enough, but pretty far away that seems like almost impossible, but maybe possible, right? So that's where kind of the idea started. It took me a couple years to kind of get my head wrapped around it and get it all together. And I started telling people, hey, I think I'm going to do this. And I was getting a little bit of feedback and support. And then we put it all together. And by the time it happened, it was 2013. So 10 years ago. There were 3 other guys who joined me on the paddle. We had 2 support boats that had like a photographer and journalist, and then a paramedic and my dad, and then the 2 captains and some volunteers. And we went to Bimini in the Bahamas, which is a very small island. And we had trained for about 9 months, done all the planning and logistics and coordination, kind of mapped it out. We weren't really sure how long it would take, if it was going to be possible, but we did it. It was not easy. We had rough weather. We battled some pretty big waves and seasickness, even hypothermia, because, at night, in the night portion of it, you're falling off into the water. You lose a lot of body heat. So you actually get pretty cold, even though you're in the tropics, and so that was an unseen challenge, but we made it back to Florida, and some of the newspaper press was there, right? And they're the ones who actually said Piper's Angels paddle from the Bahamas to Florida.
Oh.
And that's where the name Piper's Angels came from. And so we did it, but it was a one-off. I mean, it was the hardest thing I'd ever done in my life.
How long did it take to do that? I mean,
it took us 15 hours and 38 minutes, but we had a wind at our back. We thought it was going to take around 22 hours. So we came in like 7 hours ahead of what people thought we were going to do. And, we raised a little bit of money. We created a lot of awareness. And I remember when we were doing it, I thought, man, this would have worked so much better as a relay. Like doing it solo, paddling that whole distance is really hard. I was like, it almost would have been fun if we would have done it as a relay. Well, fast forward a few years, again, I mean, it was kind of a one-off thing, but when Piper got really sick when she was 8, and I kind of hit that crossroads, I had a business mentor of mine tell me, Travis, when my daughter got sick, I really had to just go be with her. That was what I needed to do most. And that really kind of gave me the key to freedom to say, okay, how can I recreate this dream? What can I do to focus on Piper, to help this community? I could start to see how other families were affected by the disease. And I could also see, like, for people who are, in business or entrepreneurs, it's like when Uber came in and really disrupted the taxi world, right?
Right.
Well, for 60 years, all the fundraising for research has gone to a cure, has gone to like people in lab coats and laboratories developing pharmaceutical drugs. In the wake of that great success of developing these drugs to help people live longer, you have people who are living longer, but now facing a lot of other complications and challenges. So the families need more support than they did even 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. So there was kind of this vacuum that was created, this gap of support for the families. And it was really obvious and clear, that like when the money goes to research for a cure, it doesn't come back to supporting the families. It comes back in the form of a pill.
Right.
Right. So that's not emotional support. That's not mental health support. That's not, financial assistance. So that really became the burning problem of like, well, what could be done, right? If you see somebody that needs help on the side of the road, somebody gets hit by a bicyclist gets hit by a car, people are going to react to respond to help. That natural instinct was like, well, what are we going to do to help? And that was really the beginning of Piper's Angels Foundation, because it was becoming more and more clear that even though it's a rare disease and it's a small population of people, that can be a good thing because you can wrap your arms around a small group of people, right? Like it's not like millions and millions of people. We're talking about at the time, 30,000 people. Now it's 40,000 people with the new cases and diagnosis. But so that really was the beginning. And we chose Piper's Angels Foundation. We thought it was a cute name because that's what the media used.
Mm.
And when we launched the foundation, we were trying to come up with, well, what are we going to do to fundraise to kind of create the beginning revenue income for the foundation to start and to create programs and create an organization. And so we looked at what we did with the crossing, modified it some, opened it up to the public, allowed relay teams to participate. And so that next time we did it was 2017, which was 4 years later. And so we went from having 4 paddlers to the second time having 34 paddlers. And we went from raising around $15,000 to raising over $130,000. And so later that year, I basically, as we formed our board of directors, I took a part-time role, right, with the foundation, and then started to build it. And then we focused on building the crossing into an even bigger event. And the next year we had 100 paddlers and we raised over $280,000. And so over a period of time, the event kept growing so substantially that we were able to use the resources and the fundraising from the event to build out the organization and create the programming. And we're going into our 7th year, and we're now one of the most impactful grassroots organizations in the country for cystic fibrosis by measure of reach, revenue, and impact.
So you're out there on the ocean, the first one from Bimini to Florida, for 15 hours. What are you thinking about? Are you thinking about Piper? What was driving you to swim that far?
Well, you're thinking about a lot because, at first you're really overwhelmed by, how daunting the task is, right? And then, you also are a bit overwhelmed by how small it makes you feel.
Mm.
You're like out there and you're out of sight of land and you're this little tiny thing in this vast ocean, and it kind of makes you feel very insignificant. You're in the dark and it's a black ocean where you can't see what's moving around you, and you hear things, and it creates a lot of delusion and fear, intimidation. You're thinking about falling off the board and what's in the water when I fall. Am I going to make it? Right? A big part for me was, why did I get all these other people into this? They're now suffering alongside of me because these poor guys, right? We set out to do this. But what really was the underlying why and the driving factor was Piper. And for me, it still is. Piper's Angels Foundation has grown, but I always say to people, you have to remember, I'm still just Piper's dad. So when you show up, yeah, you're showing up for this organization and for hundreds and hundreds of families. But for me, it's Piper. When you think about what pain you go through when you're out there doing something like a long distance endurance challenge like that, it is very painful. Your feet hurt, your knees hurt, your body aches for hours. The mental aspect is almost crushing at points to know that, like, you're looking out there and you see nothing. You see no land, you see no trees, you see nothing, and you're still going. Another hour goes by, you're still going, there's nothing. It's like being in a blue desert. If you're lucky, you see something. But for the most part, it's just a vast blue desert. But then realizing that somebody with CF is going through that treatment, that pain, that suffering their whole life with the disease, and to be out there and to be able to take a deep, full breath and feel that salt air in your lungs, and to know that other people are laying in a hospital bed with 30% lung function, facing the reality that without a lung transplant, they're going to die. Again, it really grounds you in perspective of gratitude for life. And that's really what each year when we go and do this, it's really what drives people to do it.
You've gone on to have other children. Did you have any concerns about passing this on to those children as well?
It's definitely a concern. We all have in the family gotten different genetic tests. So my partner, Danny, who I'm with now, who I have a son with, she was tested for CF and she did not have any CF genes, which, even though I'm a carrier, that meant that our son Hawkins, he would not have CF, and that he would only have a 50% chance of being a carrier. So, the gift of life is really miraculous. And even for people who know they are carriers of the gene and they know that they're rolling the dice and having a child with CF, until genetic editing or gene editing comes along where you can kind of make that decision where you could have a child and guarantee that they don't have CF. It's a big decision. I know parents who chose to adopt instead. I know parents who have had a child with CF and still chose to have another child, even with the risk that they might have another child with CF, because they wanted that in their life, and that's their choice. Luckily now it's different because people are living longer with CF. If you knew if you were going to have a child and the child was only going to live to be 3 or 4 or 5 years old, that might be a very different question.
It's interesting because I think because we can do genetic testing and see what we were all predisposed from a genetic standpoint, it's a very interesting dilemma from a society standpoint in terms of what do we do with that information and how does that information impact the choices we make about our lives, about reproduction. It can become a very complex ball of wax.
Yeah, for sure. Because if you have a child that has a disease that's hurting them or gonna, chronic illness that's causing a lot of pain and suffering, and somebody came along and said, hey, we can go in there and edit that gene and fix this. What parent is not going to want that for their child? Or if you're sick and for yourself. So it's tough because it's like, how much control do we take in our hands?
Right.
And we are living in this miraculous time where we have access to so much knowledge and information, and it is a really important question as to what we do with it.
How is Piper today?
Piper's healthier and stronger than she's ever been, so that's huge. She's in high school, so she's a freshman. She's driving, right? She has her driver's permit. She has a boyfriend. She loves to read. She's a competitive cheerleader. A lot of kids with CF, because they go through so much adversity early in life, and because their perspective on time is different than some kids, right? When you spend a lot of your time doing breathing treatments and taking pills and being in the hospital, you just value your time differently. She's really laid back. She does not get caught up in a lot of drama. She just kind of cruises along, and she loves to laugh. She's very funny. She has a great sense of humor, and she's wise beyond her years.
What has it taught you watching her survive this illness?
It's taught me almost everything valuable that I cherish in my life at this point. It's taught me how to be a better father. It's taught me how to be a better leader. Watching her go through this has really showed me what real courage is. It's grounded me in my faith. She's taught me how to smile and laugh through pain. She's taught me how to share that pain with others. She's taught me how to help others cope with what they're going through. She's taught me what community is, what unconditional love is. And all of those things are just such beautiful gifts. And that's why, as much as I would do anything to take CF away from her life, I can't help but see how beautiful adversity can be for transforming the perception of life into just a moment by moment miracle. And I wouldn't trade anything for the life that we've had together. And when I see other parents around their children and they're on the phone and they're not paying attention, they're not being present. Piper's taught me how to be present. When you're sitting with a child in the hospital and they're in pain, you're not looking at your phone. You're holding their hand. You're looking into their eyes. You're opening your heart. And she's taught me how to show up, because when things are hard, a lot of times people have resistance to that, right? So it's like, everybody has that feeling, gets that feeling like, do I really want to take that phone call? Do I really want to go to that meeting? Do I really want to go to work today? Do I really want to show up? But we have a responsibility, an ability to respond. She's taught me that that's really one of the most fundamental and simple and powerful things in life, is just showing up for each other. the way you, Patrick, are showing up for all the people that you're giving a platform to have a voice. You're showing up, and those people are showing up in some form or fashion. We use this as a tagline in the crossing, but so it's a little, it sounds a little cliche, especially in our circle and community, because we've used it so much, but it's really true. She's taught me how to be bold in the face of fear. And that has been really transformative in my life.
You're such an angel, or Piper. Who are the angels supporting you?
Well, she's my angel. She is my number one angel. I mean, when I look at her, I'm like, wow, she really is an angel. Like, she showed up here to teach me and show so many people what community and love is. Like, I mean, what a choice to show up in this life to do that. What a blessing. But at this stage in the game of life for me, it's hard for me not to see everybody as an angel. Everybody. Even the people who are, your haters, or the people who, like, even seeing the value that they're bringing you, how are you not grateful for what they're teaching you in that moment? So I think we've got a world full of angels that maybe just don't see that in themselves,
What has been your biggest leap of faith so far?
Going from seeing the world out there as something separate to seeing the world out there as something that's really in me, and seeing God in everything, in everyone, and everything. And that's been a leap that is just, it's shifted me into a whole different world, a world of unbound peace, feeling peace, at peace with everything, at peace with the fact that my daughter has this disease, at peace with the suffering in the world, and at peace with the fact that I don't know everything, right? I actually, the more I've looked for the answers, I just keep finding more questions. So, like, surrendering to that and trusting, like, I didn't know you a few months ago, right? But just trusting that, those opportunities and those gifts are going to show up, and they're going to show up in maybe really surprising ways, right? I never knew the greatest gift in my life was going to be my daughter in this disease. It has changed everything.
This season, I've really wanted to focus on talking to people who have found their voice or using their platforms to bring a message to either their community where they live, or even broader than that. And I wonder what your message is for us today.
I think the most profound and the most simple thing that I've learned from CF, the community, my daughter, being around people with a rare disease or a chronic illness, is that adversity is the starting line for courage. And courage really becomes the fuel for inspiration in our life. And from there, inspiration can really open the door to devotion and being fully devoted to something meaningful and purposeful in life. And that equation, I think, is the best thing I can share.
Travis, thank you so much for your time today and for telling your story and Piper's story. What a perfect Valentine's gift of love.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So much love. There's so much love.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And to those of you who are watching or listening, remember, we all have a voice. Use yours wisely. For everyone, thank you, Travis.
Thank you.